name is George and this is Pete. And in today's episode, we're exploring one of the greatest treasure stories ever told. The story of a British sailor turned privateer turned pirate.
A man who sailed the high seas for King William III, attacking the French. Betrayed his country, and if the tales are true, hid an immense treasure haul before being tried and executed for piracy. What makes this story so special, though, is the fact that before the noose went around his neck, he offered £100,000 for his safe release, and many believe he had it. In today's money, that totals to over £12 million, and it might just still be out there, waiting to be found.
And to finish today's show, we're going to search for some treasure ourselves. And you never know, we may even find Kidd's treasure haul. So make sure you stay tuned.
Captain Kidd was born in Dundee, Scotland, 22nd of January 1654. But like many aspects of this story, his place of birth is contested. You see, when Captain Kidd gave testimony under oath at the High Court of the Admiralty, he gave Greenock as his place of birth and his age as 41. But the name Kidd can't be found anywhere in the baptismal records for Greenock, and as far as the mysteries surrounding this man go, his place of birth is merely the tip of the iceberg. Kidd's father, a Captain John Kidd, was a sailor who lost his life at sea. But this didn't stop Kidd himself taking to a life on the water from an early age. After sailing several voyages, William Kidd settled in New York City, where he befriended many prominent people, including a number of governors. But Captain Kidd was born for a life on the sea, and by 1689 he was sailing on a ship in the Caribbean, where he took part in a mutiny, ousted his captain, and sailed to the British colony of Nevis. Shortly after they arrived, they renamed the ship Blessed William. And Kidd, an experienced leader and sailor by then, was elected captain. With England at war with France, Kidd was commissioned as a privateer by William III. His role was to protect English ships in the Caribbean from French attack. But privateering was a murky affair. To protect their interests, it was understood that privateers could reap the loot confiscated from enemy ships. They simply led the life of pirates, legally.
When Nevis was attacked by the French, Captain Kidd joined the fight with his ship Blessed William, becoming part of a small fleet on behalf of Nevis's governor. But when Kidd was victorious, the governor refused to pay his sailors for their defensive duties, telling them instead to take their pay from the French. Sailing to the French island of Marie Galante, Captain Kidd launched an attack, destroying its only town, looting the area and gathering nearly 910 kilograms of sterling silver. Continuing to live a life as a privateer, Captain Kidd led his crew to many successes. But then one day, whilst ashore on the island of Antigua in the West Indies, a notorious pirate named Robert Culliford stole Kidd's ship. Returning to New York, Kidd married an English woman in her early 20s named Sarah Bradley Cox-Ort in May 1691. She also happened to be one of the wealthiest women in the entire city. In 1695, the governor of New York, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, a man named Vella Mom, asked Kidd to search for several men associated with piracy and of course attack any French ships along the way. It was this request that would mark the beginning of the end for William Kidd. Unknown to him, it would be this voyage that would establish his reputation as a pirate. The voyage itself was financed by some of the most powerful men in the whole of England. Kidd was even presented with a letter of marque signed personally by King William III, reserving 10% of the loot for the crown.
Purchasing a new ship named Adventure Galley, which was well matched for the task of catching pirates, and equipped with 34 cannon, Captain Kidd took great pride in selecting its 150 strong crew, choosing only those he deemed to be the best and most loyal officers. However, William Kidd's luck was about to take a severe turn for the worse. When he was sailing his new ship down the River Thames, he passed a Royal Navy vessel, which he neglected to salute. This was taken as a clear mark of disrespect. In retaliation, the Royal Navy gave chase and pressed most of Captain Kidd's men into service. Short on men, Kidd returned to New York City, where he would make a key mistake which would ultimately lead to his downfall. Desperately, he outfitted his ship with a new crew. But these were not the men he'd sailed with before, or even knew he could trust. They were hardened criminals, and many were ex-pirates. One noteworthy fact in relation to his crew was the fact that his second in command, a man named Hendrik van der Huil, was black. If Captain Kidd was guilty of piracy, then Hendrik was without doubt the most highest ranking black pirate in history. In September 1696, Captain Kidd finally weighed anchor and set sail to Madagascar on his ambitious voyage. But again, good luck wasn't on his side. His new ship sprung many leaks, and cholera wiped out nearly 1/3 of his crew. But worst of all is he'd failed to find the pirates he'd been sent to catch. Many of his surviving crew abandoned him at the first opportunity, and the rest threatened mutiny. And it was about to get worse before it got better.
Over a year into the voyage, a Dutch ship was sighted and Kidd's crew were keen to attack it, which was an act of piracy. Kidd also knew that in the long run it was an act of suicide, considering the King of England, whose permission they were sailing under, was Dutch-born. Kidd refused to attack the ship, which outraged his crew, and then, to make matters worse, one of his gunners, a man named William Moore, insulted him on deck. Losing his temper, Kidd lashed out, throwing a bucket and killing the man. In those days, captains were allowed to use necessary violence to control their crews. But according to English Admiralty law, murder wasn't permitted, and unknown to Kidd, he would later face trial on those charges. Keeping control of his crew through the skin of his teeth, Captain Kidd pressed on. And after a few months he was finally rewarded. A French East India merchant ship was spotted, and Kidd quickly raised the French flag himself and gave chase before securing the biggest prize to date. Named the Quidar Merchant, she weighed 400 tons and was loaded with a variety of goods, including satins, silks, silver, and even gold. Kidd had been commissioned to attack French ships, so his actions were perfectly legal in the eyes of king and country. But the taking of the Quidar Merchant posed one problem. Its captain was an Englishman. This fact alone worried Kidd enough for him to try and persuade his crew to give back their prize. They refused.
When news found its way back to England and the Royal Navy, who already considered Kidd to be a pirate, orders were quickly dispatched to naval commanders to pursue and seize Captain Kidd and his accomplices. Meanwhile, Kidd renamed his newly seized ship and sailed to Madagascar, where he found the first pirate of his voyage. And of all the pirates he could have found, it was Robert Culliford, the man who had stolen his ship years earlier. At this stage, his ship, the Adventure Galley, was in a bad state, both worm-eaten and leaking badly, so he ordered it to be burnt, and he sailed to the Caribbean on his newly acquired prize ship. Upon reaching the Caribbean, Kidd learnt that he was now wanted for piracy, and his newly acquired ship was a marked vessel. Thinking on his feet, he turned the ship into a floating market, and he sold a huge amount of the plunder to merchant traders. And then Kidd and the remains of his crew loaded the most valuable plunder onto a different sloop, which sailed to New York. The ship itself he left with a trusted friend, on the promise he would return within 3 months, and then Kidd and the remains of his crew loaded all the most valuable plunder onto a different sloop, which then sailed to New York.
Before arriving though, Kidd made a few preparations to save his skin. Anchoring the sloop off a small island known as Gardiner's, Kidd buried most of his treasure, just in case he needed a bargaining tool. Meanwhile, in New York, word had finally reached Governor Bellamont that Captain Kidd was wanted for piracy. The very same governor that had suggested and part financed Kidd's disastrous voyage in the first place. Terrified of being implicated in piracy himself, Governor Bellamont decided that the best course of action to take would be to arrest Kidd and hand him to England in shackles. On the 6th of July, 1699, the man who would one day be remembered as one of the most famous pirates in history was captured and put in chains. He spent over a year in solitary confinement in Stone Prison, during which the treasure he'd stowed away on Gardiner's Island was secured, and a plaque remains in its place to this very day.
Finally, he was returned to England to stand trial at the High Court of the Admiralty. Before the trial, he spent some time at the infamous Newgate prison, where he would write many letters. Several of the letters were addressed to King William, pleading for clemency, and they remained unanswered. But of all the letters he would write whilst he was incarcerated at Newgate, his letters to the king would not be the ones that history would remember him for. It would be this letter here, addressed to Robert Harley, the Tory leader of the time, offering £100,000 for his release. At the time, many didn't doubt that he had it. Where would be the question that people would ask for centuries, even to this day. Kidd had hidden cash before on Gardiner's Island. It was likely to be a tactic he had used many times in his life, and he had sailed vast distances across most of the known world. Of course, £100,000 in 1701 was an astronomical figure. Today, that sum is around £12 million, and it's understandable why so many people would be keen to find it. At trial, Kidd was found guilty on all counts, totaling 5 acts of piracy and 1 count of murder, and he was sentenced to hang.
To make an example of pirates, hangings were as brutal as they could get. Instead of using a long rope, which allowed a sufficient drop to break their necks and end their pain, short ropes were used, causing the pirate to wriggle around like a fish out of water as they slowly suffocated, much to the crowd's delight. When the noose was placed around Kidd's neck at Execution Dock, Wapping, on the 23rd of May 1701, he was drunk. Unfortunately for him, the rope snapped during the first attempt to end his life, and by the time a second attempt was made, Captain Kidd had sobered up. After his death, his body was placed in an iron cage known as a gibbet, and was put on display over the River Thames at Tilbury Point for 3 whole years, as a warning to anybody else who would dare to live the life of a pirate. Over the years, Captain Kidd's tale has inspired countless people, including many writers such as Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote the original pirate novel Treasure Island, and even myself when I wrote The Man Who Met His Maker. But as well as writers, treasure hunters have also been hugely inspired by Kidd's story, and it's one that the History Project plans to explore in greater detail in the not-so-distant future.
But for the meantime, and in the interests of searching for some buried treasure, we're going to end the show by searching for some treasure of our very own. All right, Dave.
Hello guys.
Hey mate, how you doing?
Yeah, all right, not too bad.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the History Project's very own Discovery Dave. Over the coming months we're going to be spending some time together searching for buried treasure. We're here today at Sandwich Bay and we're going to spend the next hour or so having a swing to see what we can find.
So Dave, what's the most amazing thing you've ever found?
Well, recently I discovered an artefact believed to be over 2,000 years old. It's a coin, predates Roman, but later on in an episode we will discover a little bit more about it anyway. So,
sounds fantastic.
Well, we've got something there, Dave.
Right there, yeah.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Please don't forget to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and keep the History Project alive by supporting us on Patreon. If you want to see what we found here right now, please tune in to our next episode of our treasure hunting series, which is coming soon. Goodbye for now.